Hi, this is Melody LeBaron. Welcome to another Agents of Transformation interview with Jeremy Schewe. And I'm so excited to bring Jeremy to my community. Jeremy received college prep high school education with the Jesuits in Cincinnati's Xavier High School. And he received a bachelor's degree here in at the Asheville area at Warren Wilson College in environmental studies. Jeremy works as an environmental planner and he does ecological work and travels around the world. He has been able to live near, study, and absorb the stories and mysteries surrounding many prehistoric sites, such as Neolithic megaliths in Europe, early and middle woodland period ceremonial sites in North America, and classic period Mayan sites in Central America. As the founder and creative director of Enchanted Journeys, which we're going to be talking more about, Jeremy has been leading international sacred sites retreats, socioeconomic service trips, and conservation-based eco-adventures for over 11 years. Jeremy is a Grail custodian, well keeper, and steward of the timeless songs woven into the sacred landscape. As an ecologist and devotee of the Great Mother, he has been tasked with the adoration of the holiest of holies, the preservation of the sacred waters and forests, and the protection of the inner sanctum. Welcome, Jeremy. I'm so excited to uh, bring you to my community. And I want to present as we start that it was a song. We were at a stewardship summit in mid-December, you and we were a part of a large group, and it was your leading that beautiful song that Spirit said, this is someone you want to know.
Hmm.
So, welcome and thank you for that song, and thank you for the conversations we've had since. We soon realized that Jeremy and I have in common the death of a child. And out of working with that loss, each of us has been able to alchemize that grief and be of service in the world in a larger way than we were before. And so, Jeremy, I'd like us to start with your loss and how you worked with it, and then we'll get into the project that came out of that.
Hmm. Well, thank you for the warm introduction, Melody, and it's nice to meet everyone that you're connecting us with here. Assuaging grief, alchemizing darkness into light is a powerful challenge, especially for a parent to a child. I know many people have said it, but no parent should ever have to bury their child. And when we do, it changes us forever. And I think another classic focus here too is what we choose to do with our time, what we choose to do with the hurdles and the challenges that present themselves in our lives really demarcates who we are as a person. And albeit the loss of a child, I just wanted to just give up. I don't know about you. I just wanted to let go, let go, let go. And I don't think it was in my wiring to do so. You know, the way that my mother and father raised us, it's very much about how you turn a challenge into something beautiful, how you help uplift someone who is in need, even if that's yourself. And so I think first and foremost, I really want to tip my hat and my heart to my mother and say, thank you, Mary, for life and bringing me into this world, and my sister and brother as well. And thank you for showing us how to live from the heart and not from the mind or from over strategic planning. Combining those together, such a gift. The passing of my daughter brought a very strong awareness to most of my adult life. It brought an awareness to a place, Melody, where I realized all of the ceremonies and the masses and the rituals, whether we're talking about like my Catholic heritage or we're talking about the adult relationship with indigenous traditions and other Eastern Asian traditions. What it brought my attention to was that while, especially in my 20s and early 30s, those experiences were just ecstatic. I mean, ecstatic, like these rays coming in, right? It was so beautiful. It uplifted it. It allowed me to change, transition, to morph into a deeper place of service and to really how to audibly and sensibly through empathy to feel where I was in a current of a group of people collaborating together to do something greater, putting on a ceremony, putting on a ritual, similar to like what you all do there with the Center for Living and Dying. It's like you create a container and you do this thing. But what I realized when my daughter passed was that all of those years of doing all of those ceremonies and all the different traditions, they were all practice. They were all practice. Like I get up every day, I have a morning practice. I have my prayers, I have my singing, I have my chanting, I have my qigong or my yoga. Like I have it, and it aligns me on a daily basis with the highest possible service that I can be doing in this moment. But it's kind of maintenance, right? It's maintenance. It just kind of keeps ship going. It keeps me lucid. It keeps me clear, easier to engage, more articulate. And then coming together again throughout most of my 20s and 30s as a young adult in ceremony and ritual, those were practices of working with people. Again, it's practice. When life falls apart, when we lose someone so dear to us, again, synergy here of both of us losing a child, having lost my daughter before she even became an adult. When everything is falling apart, what is there but those streams of consciousness or the streams of practice, the daily practice, the community practice that are there to catch? Classic phrase from the Bible. I'm not a big Bible quoter, so I don't even know which book this is from, but classic quote is you reap what you sow. And one of the things that I realized in that time of my daughter's passing was that I had been fostering community my entire adult life. And part of the reason why I was fostering community was because I know intrinsic core belief, because of the core teachings that my mother and father passed on to me. Family, community, loyalty are the most important values to this bloodline. I was just doing it because it made sense. I was just doing all of those things, building community, being a part of ceremony, honoring the traditions, because it made sense and it was the right thing to do. It wasn't ever thought like, oh, I'm buying an insurance plan because someday my daughter might die before I, right? You do it because that is what I was called to do. But then here, as the world fell apart and nothing, business didn't matter anymore, basic economics didn't matter anymore, like all of that just gone. And what was left was like the core of practice, community practice, personal practice. And I tell you what, it was like when I would meditate in those times, when I would actually have the space for clarity, it was just like the world just looked like blackness. And there were these three strong beautiful gold to silver colored, like almost like lines at the edges of a pyramid that were like holding me up within. And as I tracked each one down, I was like, oh, there's my Catholic roots and my training with the Jesuits. Oh, there's all of the time I spent in bhakti and ecstatic bliss and chanting and, travel to India and the Southeast. Oh, and here's this other chord that is like my Irish, my Celtic heritage that I've been pouring myself into for the last 25 years. There's the songs, there's the chants, there's the practices, and all of those remain. So while everything else is falling apart, just sing, just chant. And so reap what we sow. The community showed up in such a big way. I mean, while it wasn't a classic traditional Irish wake, it was a 2 week long wake, and we sang, we cried, we prayed, we had people here preparing meals so that no one would be hungry. I mean, I don't think we ever had less than 6 or 7 people in the house. A lot of times it's like 20 people, and we would be singing, and all of a sudden, just the grief would just rise in this fierce bubble, and I would just collapse into someone's arms or on their lap and just let go. Or my wife, same thing, just like letting go into the people that we trust and love, and allowing these three pillars or these three parts of the structure to hold me together through it all.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
for that, I'm grateful. We reap what we sow. The heart knows the way.
Yeah, and there's ways in which I think we all have these structures that you describe in our consciousness. Ideally, we all have community, whether that's family or more than family. We have these traditions, these legacies, if you will, that we can really lean into. And obviously, your community really held you up in during that time. Tell us about after the 2 weeks and as you started moving into life without this most precious child, your only child. Tell us how you worked with that. When the waves of grief came and you were alone, how did you work with that?
Well, first and foremost, I need to caveat my response with I was very blessed. Well, first of all, like I'm a business owner and entrepreneur. So I was blessed to having had a really exceptional year financially prior to my daughter's passing. So first and foremost, I didn't work for 2 months, maybe three. It was about 2.5 months from the day she passed until, she passed in early November, and I didn't start working again until mid-January. And so I just want to caveat that because not everybody has that opportunity to be able to just check out for 2 months. Um, but because I had that capability, um, there were two things that really I think were ways of helping to, I hate to use the word mitigate the grief. More, sometimes we need to take a nerving sedative, right? Just to kind of calm the nerves. It's not necessarily about the work that we're doing, it's about just being. So I started taking baths. My wife was just like, wow, Jeremy's taking baths. I don't take baths, like I always saw that as being, like I'm a little more Spartan when it comes to lifestyle choices. And be like, that's a lot of water. I'll take a short shower, so I started taking baths. I think I read 14 or 15 books in a 6 week period. And for me, that was a way of like calming the nerves. While a couple of the books that I read were kind of like darker, sort of like, I don't know when you really call them fantasy books, but they were like books that, and all of a sudden I'm like reading about this dark young woman character. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm reading about my daughter. So it's like I could kind of live another variant of the life experience through some of the characters. So like that created some of that healing opportunity. Um, and then I think, like just my wife and I and some of our closer friends and family, we still spent time gathering in prayer, song, and music. It just wasn't like a continuous thing like those first few weeks. So I would say that was my second phase, was really just in another way to say it is almost like it was a check out. I was just like, this is too much. I cannot handle too much else now. I was doing the basic minimum to keep the business running so that other people had things to do. Otherwise, I mean, that was maybe a couple hours a week. Like I was just allowing myself to let go. And that was a really beautiful thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I found after Logan died that there were a few months where I was, in retrospect, kind of cocooned in
Yes.
shock, right? Kind of cocooned. And then, and those moments of lying down, those moments of taking baths, which really brings in the water element, if you understand the five element theory, really is soothing for the emotions.
Hmm.
And like you said, just calms the nerves. And then for me, like I had some really close friends that were very supportive that I would spend one-on-one time with or in small groups. Um, so after the first few months, I know at some point there was this alchemizing out of which this project came. And yeah, describe that time period to us.
Yeah, so the alchemy was a few fold. One, I had for about a year before that, I had fallen in love with free diving and scuba diving. So some of the guys that I went to St. Xavier High School with in Cincinnati, some friends from down here, some friends from college, we did a couple of like blitz dive trips that next, coming into the next year, which allowed me to do a couple of things. Because as a scientist, like, and as an ecologist, like, unfortunately, I know almost the names of all the species around us. So everywhere I'm going, I'm like mapping out all this. People like, oh, here's all the trees, here's the vegetation, here's the shrubs, here's the herbaceous, here's the mosses. Like so. All of a sudden, enter me into a world where I know nothing. Like fish, seaweed, I think, just like put me into this world of wonder. Like it started to invoke that the inner innocence, the childlike wonder, the beauty of the world, the beauty of our planet, and to be able to just surrender into that. And you're held by the water too. Like gravity's almost absent there, except for whatever weights you're carrying. So that started to open a flowering within. It started to allow me that reclimb. And then my father reached out and invited me to walk the Camino de Santiago with him, specifically Camino Frances, so across the north of Spain, the classic Camino. And he had brought it up a couple of times prior, and I'd be like, yeah, that sounds interesting. But then I was just like, Ayla Pass was like, yes, like we're gonna go and walk. I think we walked like 450 kilometers. So it wasn't all the way from St. Jean in the Pyrenees. It's about halfway across Bologna. And but it was just such a gorgeous, gorgeous experience. And part of that for me was like, I think we were doing on average like 35 kilometers a day, which is a lot for most people. And my dad is 73, I think 71 at the time. People were always just like, "You're how old? You're doing how many kilometers a day?" Like we were moving, but both of us were moving the grief by moving so fast. And the further we got in, the more we started to slow down because we started to meet more people as we went. And, because as we got closer, more people are walking. Um, so a couple of things happened on that pilgrimage. One was a newfound deepening of my adoration. In my intro, you introduced me as a devotee of the Great Mother. Like in the Christian and the Catholic tradition, of course, that's Mother Mary. And so it's like there are shrines and churches and cathedrals and all sorts of things along the way that are all dedicated to the mother. And so it just reinvoked this beauty and this sense of belonging and sanctuary, and that, oh, actually we live in the Garden of Eden still. We've been cast out by our own inadequacies, or as sins, as some would call it. But it's just like, where are we in conflict with the divine presence moving through our body temple? And so all of a sudden I'm just like, oh my gosh, here's a whole nother part of my heritage that is being reawakened. At that time, my wife was in a period of silence where she had been silent for about 4 periods, like for 4 months, I'm sorry, and had totally left behind all speech except for devotional singing when she was in her practice. Um, so I came home from walking that just lit up. I was so just like, this is beautiful. This is what I want to dedicate myself to. I want to walk pilgrimage. Um, and so we decided to walk the Camino Português Central, so up through the heart of Portugal, going north towards Santiago together, just so she could experience that. And we could experience that together. And it was gorgeous and trying, like, because the first go, I was doing 35 to 50K a day. And now we were barely doing 20 and we were moving at such slow pace because that was what my wife needed to do with her own body pace. And and so at first I was frustrated. I was like, oh, I'm not going to get out of this what I got out of the first one. And then I settled back. It was similar to being a parent, not of my wife, but I'm moving at a different pace than I would have chosen to move at on my own. Now I'm moving at my wife's pace. And so what it did was it brought us together in this really beautiful way. There was an alchemy of our own relationship.
Yeah.
So now standing back a little bit further, so walked the Camino twice in 2023. And by the time I had walked it twice, I had met so many people from Ireland who had said, oh, well, have you ever done any of the pilgrimages in Ireland? And I said, no, I didn't know there were pilgrimages in Ireland. And at the same time, I had been bringing groups of people to Ireland, usually twice a year, since 2013, and have a very deep, intrinsic connection, not just with the island and its sacred places, but also the home of my mother's family, matrilineal lineage on that side, and a very deep knowledge of the Neolithic into the mythological period, and have been teaching in those traditions for over a decade, and saturated in those for about 24 years. So I'm thinking, pilgrimages in Ireland, I don't know. So then I get back to the States and I find a few books, I order some books, and as I start reading them, I'm like, oh, I've already done all of these. They're like, most of them are half-day walks, maybe a day and a half at the most. And I was like, I mean, it's kind of a pilgrimage, but the thing about pilgrimage is, like, when you leave the world behind and you leave your devices behind and you're walking and moving at the pace that humans have been moving at for hundreds of thousands of years, there's a way that we connect and assuage the spirit that simply cannot be done by hopping in and out of cars and buses and trains and things like that and zipping. You move at the pace of humans for hundreds of thousands of years. And so I was like, oh, okay. I was disappointed because I wanted something that would at least put me on the ground for a week. I mean, ideally 2 to 3 weeks. I mean, I want to go in, do the thing. Um, so then I started finding, oh, well, there's heritage trails in Ireland. And some of these heritage trails can take weeks. And I was like, okay, but I don't want to just walk through natural landscape beauty. I can do that on the AT or the Pacific Crest Trail or the Northwest Trail. Like, we have those here in the States and they're gorgeous. Like, why would I expend all of this energy to go to Ireland to do something like that? Um, but then in one of the books that I had gotten, um, there was a reference to this pilgrimage that went all the way across Ireland, and that it was not only a pilgrimage that St. Patrick took in the 5th century AD, but also had been a pilgrimage that people all the way back in the Neolithic and the Bronze Age have been walking, so 3,500 years old. And so I was like, well, I want to do that. It doesn't exist anymore, at least in terms of being strung together as an actual route. And so this is where it's just like, okay, here I have lost my child. I'm feeling a deep call to something, and then combine that with, professionally, I do environmental planning, I do geospatial planning, ecological resource assessments. All of a sudden I was just like, oh, let's just put all that together. Like, I can help put together a route. So then I started diving deep into the archives, pulled up what were the known major sites along the way, realized that part of the reason why it was not an existing full-length pilgrimage anymore was because of political changes and economic changes back post-Jacobite rebellion or the William the Orange Wars that changed what the Celtic elite in Ireland were, who of course then would have been the patrons that were supporting the centers, supporting the pilgrims. So when that was lost, buildings collapse. They don't have money to pay for the things anymore, or in many cases were made illegal. Um, so here was this like low hanging fruit, like, oh my gosh, there's this way of St. Patrick or the way of the sun, or what the organizations that I'm working with in Ireland right now are lovingly calling the Ireland West Camino. And so that is what brought me to it. It was this, in summary, it was this combination of walking the Camino in Spain and Portugal twice, diving in deeper with my wife and family in that, feeling a deep call to a country, to an island that is part of my heritage. And I've been in relationship with the sacred land for decades. And here is this thing that had not been restored yet for 21st century pilgrims to access.
Yeah. Yeah, and so you had the technology, you had the hardware and software to map this out and do the research. And so with the show notes, I'm going to include a video of you walking with a group of pilgrims and just describe that initial trek.
Well, so we actually did it twice last year. So initially, I did it with two friends to ground truth it. So having the technology and the geospatial background is important, having the maps is important, but having almost 20 years of direct experience of taking the Ordnance Survey maps of Ireland, being able to navigate to really remote places and finding these remote sacred sites, it really dovetailed easily into this co-creative process. And I was really wanting to, similar to the Camino, I wanted to get the restored sections of the pilgrimage off of main roads, on little country lanes, or where possible on existing trail systems, so that it would be a pleasant walk for everyone. So last February, I went over with two friends, Hannah and Mark Sawicki. Mark is also based here in Asheville. Hannah is a global traveler. And we walked it, and the purpose of that was, in geospatial science, we call it ground truthing. So that's basically where you have this idea, this conceptual map that's been put together that's in respect to the georeferenced Earth, but then you still have to see if it makes sense. And so we had to do a lot of rerouting on that. And that was to set up for a group of 21 of us walking across in July of 2024. And the purpose, I mean, so that was, a lot of very close community members, family, dear friends. We did have a few random people that tagged on, and they just fit right in. It was just such a deep soul group. And so we walked, it was 187K. So it's not the full length. We're ground truthing the full length this March. And I was just on the phone with the team in Ireland about that before you and I spoke. And then we have another group of pilgrims that's then going to walk all the way from the Irish Sea at the mouth of the Boyne River at Drogheda, all the way across to Croagh Patrick for the equinox in September. So that like kind of, so to bring it back to the group in July, so we were seeking to get to the top of Croagh Patrick for what is called a Reek Sunday, which is the sort of the Catholic version of Lughnasadh. And so it's the last Sunday of July, and tens of thousands of pilgrims walked to the top. I think I know we were the only group that walked 187 kilometers to get to the top that year, and it was really, really sweet. The group, just such a dynamic group, ranging from age 26 to 70 as the walkers. And then my parents were both on the support team, and they're in their early 70s, crawling towards their mid 70s, a few years later here. But they were a support team, just to help out with logistics and getting people taken care of. Or if somebody had an injury, they could get picked up and taken somewhere so they could rest for a day, that sort of thing. But the beauty of the heart of this was just absolutely gorgeous. And 3 days before we left, a friend of mine in Cincinnati, who also owns an environmental firm, um, environmental solutions, she decided to underwrite the cost of having a documentary created. So the film, the little short that you're going to show here shortly is actually what the teaser for that documentary, which is due out in mid-February. And I'm really excited to see how that comes together, mostly because I feel like how that's going to promulgate uh, this as a pilgrimage route, because it's so impactful in Ireland. They're so excited for it in Ireland. I mean, it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. So this documentary is going to really help uplift that and bring that to more people. Yeah, hopefully continue the journey of deepening that.
You know, Jeremy, in 2010, I attended the Ancient Wisdom Rising conference that was put on by the Sacred Fire Foundation, where Indigenous elders from all over the world were brought in. And literally, we sat around the fire at the feet of these elders and listened to them teach. And I had some powerful experiences with some of these elders there. And I will never forget this wisdom. So after they were each given some time to teach, and then afterwards we were allowed to ask questions. And in that interaction, Ilarion, one of the elders from the Aleutian Islands, who I really received so many beautiful teachings from, he encouraged all of us to restore our indigeneity
Mm,
by beginning to research our own heritage and begin to, uh, if we can, to travel to the lands of our heritage and begin to have an understanding, not with the mind, but with the body. And what you're describing, going on those two Caminos in Europe and then uh, uh, creating this one in Ireland, this is the kind of thing that I've been doing since 2010 to restore my own understanding. I found myself saying to one of my clients that there's an activation that happens in our blood and in our bones.
mhm,
We step on the lands of our ancestry and we walk those lands with the intention to activate that restoration, which is one of the reasons why I am so excited about this project. And because I feel like for so many of us, we are looking for ways to really connect deeply with our heritage. And I've done twice been on pilgrimage in Ireland, in Scotland, and in France, and which are all lands of my ancestry. So it's really important, I think, for us to understand and begin doing some research. One of the outcomes for me that has happened from working with my own grief. Now, my project was the gift that came out of me alchemizing my grief was my book, Transforming Death. But the uh, the way in which we work with our losses, which you and I have had a big loss, a big personal loss, but we are all in this time that my teacher, Francis Weller, and the Dagara tribe, Malidoma and Sobonfu Somé teachers have shared with him. This is a time they refer to as the long dark. We are living in an unstable climate. We are living in a time of systems collapse. And for those of us who are collapse aware or are becoming collapse aware, for those of us who are aware of the devastation that has happened here in our land, Western North Carolina, but happening as we speak in Japan, with the earthquake yesterday and the tsunami happening in LA with the fires, those of us who are willing to put our attention on these things instead of just pushing it away and recognize the earth herself is going through changes that we can either try to resist and push away from, but then that's going to set up some tension that we don't need in our own bodies, or we can choose to be with what's happening, to be present with what's happening, to and the only way that I have discovered is something, from my teacher, Joanna Macy, that reconnects me to my community, to my beloveds, to myself, to my heritage in a way that allows me resilience, allows me to resource myself so that instead of feeling depleted
Mhm.
by everything that is happening around the world, everything that is happening in our country as systems collapse, these things that you and I are talking about, these ways of accessing are, even for me, just watching the short film that was the short documentary that was created last July it reconnected me to the joy of my heritage, just watching it. And so I am thrilled that we are talking about this. I'm thrilled that we are putting this in front of our communities as a choice, as an option. Um, and Jeremy, a lot of my community is here in Western North Carolina. So please, if you would speak to some upcoming things that I know you're doing here in the area.
Sure. Yeah. So, well, tonight online, we're actually having a deep dive into this whole restoration of this pilgrim's path. So happy to send you the invite for that, or at least put you on the calendar invite, and that way you can join if you will. It's at 7:30. Next Friday, we're having an early Imbolc ceremony up in Barnardsville at a friend of mine's place called Mandala Springs. That's going to be lovely. This is at least 120-year-old Celtic tradition called the Flame and Rose ceremony. And we basically are singing ecstatically in Irish and making offerings to the fire and to the flame and just re-sowing the seeds of what we're dedicating ourselves to for the year to come. So those are a couple things that are coming up here in the next few weeks. Um, Otherwise, in terms of other offerings in respect to what we've been talking about, we host every year a week-long retreat at the Temple House in County Sligo in Ireland. And so we bring traditional musicians and storytellers, Sean Key, in from all over the west of Ireland to converge in the house. And it's just lovely. We rent out the entire estate. So we're doing that this year from September 3rd until the 10th. And this is our third year doing that. Very excited for that. And right now there's still a couple of spaces available for the pilgrimage walk, starting on September 12th of this year. And that will run until the end of September. And then we do a 3-day retreat out on Clare Island, just an integration retreat from having walked before. We release everyone back to the secular world, if you will.
Yeah.
So these are a few of the things that I can think of.
Oh, so exciting. So exciting. In my tradition, which I also follow the Wheel of the Year, the cross-quarter days. So we've got the winter and summer solstice, we've got the spring and fall equinox, and then we've got these cross-quarter days, which in my Irish Siobhan training, it was, taught that these cross-quarter days are like the spokes of the wheel that turn the wheel. And so, and they're fire festivals. And so, I'm thrilled that you're going to be doing this. And I would encourage people who, in my community who don't know. When I met my husband, I said, "Where are your people from?" And he said, "Well, Stanton, Virginia, and around that area." And I said, "No, no, your ancestors. Where are your ancestors from? Uh, where are they indigenous?" And he was like, he had no idea. He
Hmm.
had he had never even thought about it. And I was shocked. And so we did some research and we found out and we have some commonalities, but um, and so, we've planned some travel so that we can restore him to his hair.
Beautiful.
But I would encourage people to look at where their ancestors are from. And if you don't have stories, if your grandparents didn't do you the blessing that yours and mine did of recording all of that, then you can do a DNA test and find out. And what is so much fun is there's Irish ancestry in so many people around the world. Even my friend who's got African ancestry has Irish ancestry. And during those 1,000 years of colonization, where the English were trying to colonize the Irish, there was so many Irish sold into slavery around the world, including Africa.
Yep.
So so many people have Irish ancestry, and I feel like it's good to reconnect with that if we can.
Yeah, I had a really dear friend who really identified with her African heritage and just completely identified. And after she completed her DNA analysis, she found out she was less than a tenth of African heritage. She was three-quarters Irish. And she was just like, oh my gosh, I have a whole new way that I want to connect with you now. Just so neat. Just, yeah, we learn to identify with something because that's what we're culturally attuned to. But then it's beautiful to track where we come from.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I think it's important. I think there is an activation that can happen when we do that can really resource us and make us more resilient. Um, Jeremy, thank you so much for being willing to talk about your grief, your loss, and what has come out of it. And do you have any, because I feel like we're in a time of collective loss. If we're paying attention, we are aware of losses that are happening in our country and around the world. And we are having to move that. We're having to move that in the body. And you spoke of singing and I'm assuming also dancing. What are some other ways that you are working with the bigger, more collective overculture losses? Um,
I think one of the things that I would respond to that initially, Melody, would be uh, to say, like, is to do things simply. I mean, I'm sure you've seen Brother, Sun, Sister Moon and like the music that Donovan did in the background of the story of St. Francis and St. Clare. And there's such a beauty in simplicity. And so a more direct response then is one of the things I've realized. At 20, I thought I could save the world, and that was my job. At 47, I understand that I can contribute, but that I'm not going to save the world. And so one of the things is I've done is depersonalized and recognize like where is God or where is the divine bringing my attention? Where can I make the most difference? For example, recently with Hurricane Helene, it was just like I wanted to do everything, make sure people are fed, make sure goods are coming in, make sure that people's homes are dried if they had a tree collapse, all the things. And at first, that's kind of what I was doing, just like many of us, just throwing myself, and it was exhausting, exhausting. I literally felt we were in a post-apocalyptic hell realm, and there was no time to sustain any sort of higher thought. It was basic needs and making sure others' basic needs were being met. And as I started to distill down my focus, I was just like, okay, professionally, I work with water and ecology. I had had a few friends say, "Hey, we've got springs on our mountain just outside of town. You want to do something with that?" And so I slowed down, pulled together a team. We tapped these springs, ran, a third of a mile of piping to various tanks to hold it so that people could get drinkable water. And there was such a beauty in the simpleness of here's a task, here's a team. Everybody can know what they're going to do, go out and do the thing, and the mind slows down. And
Right.
so then the journey becomes then like I am doing something, I am making the world a better place. And it's not some big convoluted, very theological or philosophical anything. It's just water. And so bringing that back personally and in terms of everyday life and post Helene and things are more normalized, at least in our neighborhood and our household, is again like I can't take everything on.
Right.
And I have applied I still have to do my work because I still need to make income. So like I get to apply myself with the environmental planning there. But like my legacy project that I'm working on now, of course, is helping this pilgrimage in Ireland to flower and flourish. Knowing how much beauty and peace was brought to me walking the pilgrimage in Spain and in Portugal, and knowing that even though that's, whatever 1200, 1400 years old, or however, the different numbers are that are put out for it, knowing that that pilgrimage almost died as well until the late 60s, early 70s, when a priest made a lion's effort to restore it, to bring it to what it is now. And it's amazing that one person had something happen in their life, said, "This is what I'm going to do." And it's going, and so how much beauty that brought. So whether what I'm doing will ever do that, I don't know. But right now I know it is focusing. And like one of my prayers every day is, if not this, then show me something higher or better. And as far as I can see, this is what I'm to work on right now. And I think that instead of sitting here scrolling through all the world's problems
Right.
is the heart of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Focus on something we can do.
Yeah.
And it might be just raising a child properly so that there's an adult in the future that's not hardwired to everything electronic and is capable of empathy, mental astuteness and maturity and the ability to critically think. Like that is a miracle. Like, thank you, parents. Thank you for doing that. Thank you to my parents and thank you for the ones that are doing it now.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, truly. So, yes. So, thank you for that. And I just want to echo what you just shared that there is, this good advice to think globally, to connect globally, but to act locally. So I have to say that teaching has made such a difference. So instead of stewing and being upset about the things that are happening, I know I am more resilient because I know that I am part of something called GAP Asheville, which is a part of the Racial Equity, the Social Justice and Racial Equity Coalition. And it's really funneling resources and attention to our underserved and unserved communities. And I'm part of CCLD, the Center for Conscious Living and Dying, and I'm serving there. So I've got these communities that reflect what I'm passionate about, where
Yes.
I know I'm funneling my time and attention, my resources, that is making a difference in my local community. And Jeremy, if I had a major loss, um, people would come looking, people in those communities would come looking for me as they did during the hurricane. I had so many people because we were in an area that didn't have cell or internet for weeks. And so I was on so many lists of missing persons just because so many people were worried and came looking for me. I am part of these local communities where I know I make a difference. It's not in an overwhelming way, and it really creates this feeling of being held. like you've described. So, oh, thank you so much for being willing to come and talk about the hard things and talk about the beauty that can result as we work through the hard things.
Thanks for inviting me on, Melody. I mean, it was an absolute joy to meet you back in December. And yeah, this just feels like another nice milestone in our friendship growing.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Hmm